Well, I've learned a lot. So far this has been a great experience, and my talk will be a little bit more meta and not focusing on one specific project, but try to summarize some of the issues that we've learned by looking at many of similar kind of projects. And so I will try to focus on data collaboratives, and which has been the subject so far with regard to how do you establish public-private partnerships around data or around AI for social good. And so I'm Stefaan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of GovLab, which is an action research center based in New York. We are part of the engineering school of New York University. And so GovLab stands for Governance Laboratory. And we're looking into how do we change the way we govern using new technologies. And surprise, surprise, data happens to be one of the areas that we look at as well. And many of you have already focused on the, if this is working at all, many of you have already focused on, of course, the core problem that all is not well in the world. And so we have, of course, many challenges. But at the same time, as we're having increased complex challenges, we also have, of course, an increased datification. And I think many of you have already focused on several areas of datification. And it's interesting that actually we've mainly focused on 4 kinds of data sets so far, which is, of course, satellite data, call detail records, social media data, and then also, of course, other data that has been generated as a result of communications. But if you think about it, every day, as a result of digitalization, every day data is being collected no matter what you do. And so I've started mapping the data categories that we currently have as a result of datafication. And so far, I have 80 categories of data that is being generated just by moving around, or by buying something, and that includes, of course, financial transactions, but also more and more e-receipts that you can start using, for instance, to mapping obesity. By communicating, and many of you have already, of course, focused on certain kinds of data sets, by just media and entertainment consumption, personal health and well-being, obtaining an education and job experience, and just also home assistants and more sensor devices. So you basically have this explosion, and this explosion of datification is mainly led, surprise, of course, by the private sector. And so what we have started looking at is, of course, how do we leverage the data that has been generated as a result of datification for public good, beyond, of course, call detail records, which is an important data set, or satellite, or social media, but also other data sets such as financial transactions, e-receipts, you name it. And of course, if you start thinking about private data for public innovation, it's a different proposition than, for instance, the open government data movement, where the assumption is that data is being made available, free and computable and accessible. And so here we changed somewhat the paradigm and said, well, this is ultimately not about making data available. This is really about establishing new private and public-private partnerships, which is why we started looking at the concept of data collaboratives. And so our project, which is all available on datacollaboratives.org, has been multifaceted. And the first kind of work we've done was really trying to understand what is actually happening in the space of data collaboratives. And so far, we have a repository where we have more than 150 examples where corporations across the datafication universe, corporations have started collaborating with other public-private and quite often researchers around the data they have. And based upon that, we've developed a methodology to establish data collaboratives, and some of the data collaboratives have been presented already today, the ones that we had, for instance, with ISI Foundation, but we also have other data collaboratives that we have established since then. But we also have generated some insights about data collaboratives, and those are the ones that I would like to share. And of course, some of those insights have already been shared as well. Now, I also have to say is that the concept of data collaboratives have, of course, been increasing the last few years. And so, for instance, the European Commission has created this business-to-government data sharing, and I'm on the expert group as well. And of course, the World Bank, along with several others, have now also established a partnership around data collaboratives. Now, the first thing, of course, that we have established, and this has already been shared numerously, so I'm going to go quickly, is that basically data collaboratives have the potential to transform every part of the innovation or policy lifecycle, starting from the prioritization or the agenda setting to the ideation to ultimately implementation, review, and so on. And because of 4 specific value propositions that data collaboratives can bring. First, improving situational analysis, increasing predictive capabilities, but also knowledge creation as it relates to cause and effect. And we haven't seen that much. I mean, much of the discussions and the presentations we had were about situational analysis and around prediction. We haven't seen that much around cause and effect explanation, for instance, and then, of course, impact assessment. And so it's those 4 basic, and it's always those 4 somehow, so it's not rocket science after a while. It's always like one of those 4 or a hybrid. Those 4 value propositions are behind data collaboratives. Now, what we also have seen is that there is no one model of data collaboratives. And so we have at the moment around 6 types of data collaboratives that we have seen established. And it's very interesting. One, of course, was at length discussed, which is the kind of prizes and challenges, which is one kind of data collaborative model. We have, of course, data cooperatives or data poolings. Right? There was a discussion about establishing a data commons. That's one, of course, data collaborative model. Research partnerships. Trusted intermediaries, also where you actually delegate the selection and curation of partnerships to an intermediary, and we will hear probably about this also more. API, which is of course nirvana, where you actually have an API to download the information, and then there is less perhaps of a partnership model, but clear access. And also more and more, and we see actually a shift towards more and more, not collaborating around the data, but collaborating around the intelligence of the data. For instance, in the US, you have JP Morgan Institute, which specifically was created to generate insight about the data of JP Morgan without sharing any of the data sets that they have. But as a result, anyway, if you care about insights about economic activity, for instance, as a result, you have now improved economic statistics that quite often is far more agile and in real time than the existing economic statistics that are available in the US, for instance. So you see this data collaboratives emerging. Here, based upon our analysis of the 150 examples, we see that data pooling is still the most common one, in addition to research partnerships. And then, of course, trust intermediaries and the intelligence products are also quite high. And we also see that this is not just for one SDG, but that it's across subject areas with especially high application in health and economic development, and then we have the other areas that emerge as well. Now, the question, of course, that we also posed is then, why do corporations share their data or collaborate around their data? And so we developed the 6 R's, which are basically 7 R's of data collaboratives, or what are the incentives for the corporations to share. And so they range from reciprocity, i.e. I share something and then I get something back, and that getting something back could be data, but it's quite often domain expertise, because quite often they don't have the domain expertise in-house, and as a result, they get the reciprocity. To research and insights, and so this was already mentioned before, and that research and insights can actually then be used internally for product development as well. To, of course, corporate social responsibility, regulatory compliance, but also quite often for retainment of talent. Because quite often data scientists within the corporation are more likely to stay within the corporation if they also can work on hard societal problems, in addition to, of course, pure product development problems as well. And so these are the 7 R's, or the incentives. And we believe it's very important for the demand side to understand what the incentives are of the supply side, so that if you engage or try to establish a partnership, that at least there is an understanding on what would a possible value proposition be for the supply side to start collaborating around their data. Now, clearly, again, various concerns have already been raised, ranging from privacy and security to of course, is the data representative, to cultural challenges within the corporation, to also competitive challenges, because that quite often is one of the core concerns why certain data collaboratives fail, is to fear that some of the data might be used by competitors. Now, based upon all that, we basically have now developed our strategy moving forward. And it's really about making data collaboratives more systemic or systematic, sustainable, and responsible, because these are the 3 elements that makes it work, or that can scale up the data collaborative space. Because to a large extent, from a systematic point of view and a systemic point of view, most of the efforts that we've seen today never go beyond the prototyping. Many of those efforts actually are prototyping, and they never go into a systematic kind of use on data collaboratives. Many of them are also hardly sustainable, which is why they never go to a systematic environment. And there is always concerns with regard to responsibility of the data collaborative. So in order to scale data collaborations, we're going to have to work on making data collaboratives systematic, sustainable, and responsible. And that's what we started working on in order to actually lower all those barriers. And so one of the areas that we started looking into, how do we make data collaboratives systematic, is first of all trying to understand the data supply side. And it turns out that anyone here in the room, and of course it's easy because those individuals are in the room, but if they would not be in the room, if you would want to reach out to a corporation around their data, I always said, good luck finding the person you should talk to, right? Because it's very hard to understand who within the corporation is responsible for the data or can actually engage with you around the data. And that's because there is no profession yet within corporations that really have this data stewardship role and that can drive this data stewardship role. And so that's why we started an initiative which is called datastewards.net, and you can go to the website and see what we're trying to do there. But here we're really trying to understand what are the roles and functions that need to be present within a corporation in order for making data collaboratives scale and systematic. And we have identified those 5 crucial roles that data stewards, whether it's a team or whether it's an individual or whether it's a distributed set of individuals, need to implement in order to really make data collaboratives work. And they range from, of course, being able to engage with partners and also vet partners, because it turns out we do different data stewards camps now, and so next week we will have the 3rd data stewards camp where we bring data stewards from the private sector together. We had one in San Francisco and one in Cape Town and now one in London. And one of the clear challenges that data stewards from the supply side have is to really vet the partners who they work with. And how do they vet the partner? I mean, what are the criteria? And at the moment, there is no established practice on how they would even start thinking about who are the partners they would work with. The second one, which already was mentioned as well, turns out to be internal coordination, because quite often legal needs to be involved, marketing needs to be involved, data needs to be involved, quite often the CEO's level needs to be involved. And how do you coordinate? If there is no owner of that project, it's not going to go anywhere. And we see a plethora of data collaboratives that have failed, mainly because they couldn't get the internal coordination established. Data audit, by which we mean understanding what data can answer what question, and do we have the data in order to start answering that question, dissemination, and then ultimately also the sustainability questions. We also start looking into how do we make the supply side more systematic, and here we're launching, and I don't have the slide up here, but we're launching this month a new initiative which is called the 100 Questions Initiative, because it turns out that it's very hard to know if someone knocks on your door, what is the question that matters? And so what we are going to do is actually try to surface the 100 questions that matter according to the bilinguals that we are going to engage with, which are this community of domain experts that happen to be also data science experts. And as a result, the signal, the demand signal, will be more validated than quite often the elements. Sustainable here, the real challenge is, of course, how do we understand both the transaction costs involved, and that involves also the actually financial cost in order to engage in data collaboratives. As mentioned several times, it is not a free enterprise. And so what we need to do is become far more transparent about what is the real cost of actually doing this, but also what is the opportunity cost. And we hear that more and more, that when we engage with data stewards, they quite often say, well, it's a challenge these days because quite often we engage with partners who could also be our clients as we are developing monetization strategies. And so it's going to have to become far more sophisticated on how do you decide on what are the trade-offs between the public good and the value that you seek to address, and then the transaction cost. And so towards that end, we have developed a value assessment and cost assessment and business model creation strategy, and we have applied it in a project that we have in New York City around circular city data, which I'm happy to explain more. Third challenge is how do you make it responsible? Because ultimately the risks are not just at the sharing stage, it's across the data lifecycle. And so we are developing a data responsibility methodology that assesses the risk across the data lifecycle. And we do it together actually now with UNICEF while we try to understand the data responsibility journey within UNICEF as it relates to their data use and what that means with actually moving forward. But we also started something, the contracts for data collaboration, because it turns out that if there is one point in the establishment of the data collaboration that always quite often leads to failure, it's the establishment of the data sharing agreement. And what we are building right now is a repository of data sharing agreements. And so my ask to everyone in the room, if you can share your data sharing agreement, we can add it to the repository. Of course, we will take out, or you can take out any, we're only interested in the language, so that we actually can now try to develop a repository of language that has been used, because quite often legal counsel says cannot be done. And if you could have an example on how others have used it and what the other techniques were, that is ultimately valuable. And ultimately what we want to develop is this contractual wheel of data collaboration, where you basically go through a certain set of questions ranging to why, the what, what's the data, who has access and under what conditions, the how, the when and the where. These are basically the essential question that informs a data sharing agreement, and that quite often is wrapped into legalese that no one understands. And so what we try to do here is to ultimately make it more straightforward, so that at least before you go engaging with the legal counsel, you have an understanding of what the principles might be. So these were some of my questions, and if you want to stay in touch, we also have a service which is called the Living Lib, where we share on a regular basis many of the papers that were shared today, so that you can stay informed around innovations in governance moving forward. With that, out of time, and everyone is already almost exhausted anyhow, so I'm going to stop here.